Well, hello, friends. What an honor it is to have today to welcome to LifeSite News Mr. Eric Scheidler, one of the leading pro-life voices in this country. Perhaps you know him. I guess we always have to say this when we introduce Eric, son of the giant of the pro-life movement, Joe Scheidler. Eric joins us now from Chicago to talk not just about what happened at the Supreme Court last week with the Mississippi case. Now we're kind of in the no man's land where the judges are making their decisions. But Eric is here to talk about where we go from here and why we can't rest on our laurels. So, Eric Scheidler, welcome to LifeSite, sir.
Great to be with you.
So, Eric, first of all, just your reaction. You were there last week. What was your reaction to what you heard, first of all, from inside the courtroom and just the vibe that was out there in front of the Supreme Court?
Well, it was an incredibly optimistic atmosphere outside of the Supreme Court. First of all, because there were so many pro-life advocates there. I know many people, especially people who live in the D.C. area and are familiar with the lay of the land there. They were really surprised, expecting to see that we would be very much outnumbered by supporters of Roe v. Wade, by the pro-choice side, because D.C. is such a progressive city and it's so activated. And in fact, it would be kind to them to say we only outnumbered them by 3-1. It was maybe more like 4 or even 5-1.
Yes.
And they were actually ringed by people showing abortion victim photos. So it was just an incredibly optimistic atmosphere, festive and optimistic, especially once the oral arguments began.
Yeah.
And Solicitor General Scott Stewart was doing such a fantastic job of presenting the case. And just, in his very first couple of sentences, he flat out made the case that the court should overturn Roe versus Wade, this outdated and never appropriate and always unjust and truly violent and horrific precedent that we've had to live under for nearly 50 years.
Yep.
After listening to the arguments, not just once, but twice, I listened to them live during the arguments, and then again on my drive back to Chicago from Washington the next day. I'm even more optimistic. The questions that were asked about so many different things, about where the line of demarcation should be in pregnancy, where the state has an interest, about whether there's a stare decisis issue here, should this precedent be held onto just because it's a precedent? What about adoption? What about the life of the unborn child? I mean, it was an amazing moment to see these issues being spoken of in court, because so often in these cases, they get bogged down by kind of clinical legal stuff, terminology is disputed, and to see an actual robust discussion about how abortion harms women, about what options are available for women, about what women's freedom really means, and about the life of the unborn child that also ought to be taken into our calculations here, was incredibly bracing and exciting and finally appropriate, and I was just really thrilled. So I'm filled with a tremendous sense of optimism. I'm all but certain that the Supreme Court is going to uphold Mississippi's law, and I would not be surprised. I mean, we all have to be cautious. We don't want to set ourselves up for a huge disappointment. On the other hand, I think if we don't have faith that they really could overturn Roe versus Wade, that may be our undoing, because it's going to take months of continuing to, I'm going to put scare quotes around it, lobby the court. They're supposed to be not touched by public influence and not political in any way, but we all know that they do actually look at public response to things. They are reading the op-eds. They are reading about themselves in the papers. And we have to know that, and we have to have our message out there so they're not only seeing the message coming from the other side, who are losing their minds over the possibility that Roe might be overturned.
They really are. And, what's really surprised me, Eric, is just how much the secular press seems resigned to it happening. So that's just been shocking, actually.
And I've been very encouraged by that. Atlantic Monthly, Roe is about to go. New York Times, this is how Roe gets overturned. They're more certain of this fate than I think even we are. Part of that might be posturing. I think they might be trying to rally the base and get people fired up so that they're activated and pushing back in some way. But I really think the writing was on the wall in the questions that were asked. I mean, particularly from Brett Kavanaugh and John Roberts. Two votes that are maybe a little less certain on these kinds of issues in some people's minds. Roberts was almost not begging would be putting it too much, but he was trying to get the pro-choice lawyers to say, okay, well, if it's not viability, is there anywhere else we could go with a line of demarcation where we could say that there needs to be some sort of state interest or not? They were not willing to offer any answer to that question. They were giving the Supreme Court two choices. You uphold the status quo of Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey, the 1992 case that reaffirmed Roe, or not. Or you overturn it. And I was kind of encouraged that they put it that way. They gave him only those two choices, and I think that bodes well for us. And of course, Brett Kavanaugh listing off a whole series of precedents. Now we have to be careful when we analyze Supreme Court arguments.
Yep.
It could very well be that the justices are asking questions not for themselves, but for another justice on the court, or simply to make the case for history that they've really thoroughly thought about these issues and considered all angles. But even with that caveat, I'm extremely optimistic.
Well, Eric, I know that you've been watching these court cases perhaps for your lifetime, because I know I just finished reading your father's outstanding autobiography last year, and he really digs into Casey versus Planned Parenthood and all these cases that made their way to the high court. So it's really helpful to get your analysis of this. And I just got to ask you, Eric, I know I was thinking about your dad last week, the great Joe Scheidler. He would have been there with his fedora on. I know you had to be thinking about him as well.
I certainly was. He, for many years, when he first got in the pro-life movement, he and my mother planned to dedicate 5 years to the movement. They thought that would be what it would take to simply show Americans what we already knew back then about the beauty of life in the womb, about the fragility of this innocent life in the womb that we should nurture and protect instead of discarding like trash. The battle proved to be much more difficult to win than they first thought. And as the years went by, he thought he would never see Roe v. Wade overturned. In his final years, though, he began to feel more optimistic, especially with some of these more recent court appointments, particularly Amy Coney Barrett, a justice that we had a case before about a restrictive bubble zone in the city of Chicago some years ago. And so he was growing more and more optimistic. I was really disappointed that he couldn't be there with us. And the evening before the actual oral argument, there was a prayer vigil out on the steps of the Supreme Court. And I offered a prayer of thanks for all of those who had fought so tirelessly over the decades since Roe v. Wade to win this day where we really have a chance before the court, including people like Dr. Jack Wilkie, who was one of the first advocates and who actually, his pamphlet, Life or Death, was what stirred my father back in 1972, before Roe v. Wade. Story he recounts in his memoir, Racketeer for Life, to get involved in the pro-life movement in a very direct way. People like Dr. Bernard Nathanson, the former abortion provider, who came over to the pro-life side and kind of gave us the inside scoop of the lies that went before the Supreme Court in that Roe versus Wade case in the first place. Mildred Jefferson, the famous African-American physician and brilliant thinker who was an early advocate for the right to life. And, and the recently deceased Paul Brown of American Life. We miss these great heroes. We stand on their shoulders, and we owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to the way they kept this issue alive before the public, before the press, before the courts, before the legislatures of the 50 states. And while we miss them tremendously, we are filled with joy that their witness and their work is paying out in such a dramatic fashion and may achieve a tremendous victory that they all fought so hard for.
Yeah, so Eric, your dad founded a Pro-Life Action League, and you could really see the fruits of all your dad's work. This man was a PR genius. I didn't even realize that he taught journalism at Notre Dame, so he knew how to use images and to plan events and to get people's attention. And I was thinking that you mentioned a little bit earlier how you had your pro-aborts over there on one side who were cursing and snorting and going through all their theatrics. But you had the Christians, the African-American Christians who set up over there and they had their images. And that's what your dad brought to this movement. He brought action. And I'll tell you, if Anybody watching this right now, go on Amazon right now and order Racketeer for Life. If you want to get jacked up, if you want to just reading that book makes you want to run through a brick wall, Eric.
Better yet, go to prolifeaction.org.
Oh, yeah.
And order a copy.
Okay.
I wish I'd had him sign, 4 or 5 cases of those
right.
as he was getting older, so we could still offer signed copy, because he was signing every copy up until the very end. But we can sell you a copy. You'll get plugged in with the Pro-Life Action League, and you'll be able to actually do that thing. He said do something pro-life every day.
Yep.
And we're here to help you to do that. That's what the Pro-Life Action League is all about.
Amen. So, Eric, now you formed a new group, and let's talk about that, because we really need to talk about where we go from here.
Right. So we've formed a coalition called Overturned Roe, and you can find out all about us at overturnedroe.org. We wanted to be right up front, just like Attorney General Lynn Fitch of the state of Mississippi, and calling on the Supreme Court to flat out overturn Roe versus Wade, this horrible precedent that has brought nothing but pain and suffering to our country and made our federal politics really toxic. And so we've been inviting people to get active, to pray for the justices. If you go to overturnedroe.org, you can go to a forum where you can actually be assigned a specific justice to pray for, so that we are blanketing all 9 justices with prayer,
right,
including the ones on the other side, including Sonia Sotomayor, who compared unborn children to the brain dead, and in a bizarre few moments of the oral arguments, but also for the more pro-life justices or more conservative justices. They all need to be blanketed with prayer, as well as their clerks and the entire nation and the media and all. We are advocating people to really take ownership of this issue. We've got a wonderful new flyer called Roe v. Wade, What's at Stake? I'm just looking to see if I have a copy nearby at hand. This new flyer, Roe v. Wade, What's at Stake, it presents kind of a neutral image. So people get this, what's this all about? It presents the controversy, in sort of objective terms here, pro-life, pro-choice. But on the inside, we illuminate what's wrong with Roe. Roe versus Wade allows far more abortion than people realize. About 2/3 of Americans say they support Roe, but they don't really mean it.
Right.
They don't really know what Roe allows. What they mean when they say they support Roe is, I kind of can see where I shouldn't get in the way of a woman early on in pregnancy, difficult circumstances. They don't understand that Roe versus Wade and Doe v. Bolton and Planned Parenthood versus Casey and this whole series of Supreme Court cases and precedents allow abortion for sex selection. They allow abortion very late into pregnancy, into the 4th and 5th month of pregnancy. They allow abortion for birth control when people are just, not interested in using birth control. That's a whole separate issue, and I don't advocate birth control for other reasons. But, people don't understand that so much of the abortion that they object to morally and ethically and politically and personally is actually allowed by Roe versus Wade. Many people don't realize that if Roe v. Wade is overturned, this will simply return the abortion issue to the people. Often it's said that it returns it to the states, and that's technically true, but a better way to frame that is to say it's returned to the people for the democratic process to unfold. If indeed there's a strong argument to be made that women should have this right to abortion, make your case before the people, not before 9 unelected judges. It was 7 all-male, all-white judges back in 1972 that decided to allow abortion on demand. And that people don't know that. They also don't know how toxic our politics have become because of Roe. People have a sense that abortion is a contentious issue, but have they realized that issues like immigration, issues like infrastructure and healthcare, solutions to these problems evade our efforts because abortion stands in the way. It makes single-issue voters out of so many of us. I'm always going to vote on that issue first. I would love the opportunity to vote on something else for a change.
Right. Well, that's what the church still teaches, despite the efforts of some bishops, that abortion is an intrinsic evil and it is preeminent. Right. That's
right. If you look at this, just look at the scale of abortion and the 62 million children who have lost their lives since Roe v. Wade was decided. When you look at the way that this has poisoned our nation's understanding of how we should care for the poor. And there's an attitude out there that we don't need to care for the poor. We don't need to to provide the kind of assistance that Christ calls on us to, because they really just ought to be aborting their inconvenient children, that the poor's lives don't matter as much. It has just corroded our spirit. It has poisoned our sense of family, our valuation of children. Look at how children have become pawns in so many ways. I mean, not to get too off track here, but this demand that children be vaccinated against a virus that does them almost no harm. Very few children, a tiny, infinitesimal number of children have been badly impacted by COVID. And in every case, they had horrible comorbidities along the way. And those are, of course, tragic deaths, but to make millions and millions of children have to be vaccinated to help somebody else, to deprive children of their mother and father so that gay couples can experience parenthood. And I sympathize with their desire to be parents. We all have a sort of innate desire to be mothers and fathers. It's built into us the way that we were made in God's image. But to sacrifice the needs of children to the desires of adults, that all stems from Roe versus Wade. And I would argue it goes farther back than that. It goes back to the embrace of contraception, especially within Christian churches, even within the Catholic Church by so many of our priests and bishops, and of course couples that have ignored the beautiful and brilliant teachings of Humanae Vitae. So the depth to which the roots of abortion have drilled into the tissue of American life can hardly be exaggerated. If it were to be overturned, I think it would be a new springtime of hope for not just the pro-life movement, but for the entire nation.
I totally agree with you, Eric. It's like if we need to take care of abortion first, and then all those other things you talked about, which is what Pope St. John Paul II talked about, is just being the culture of death. It's the culture of life, or it's the culture of death. And it's really not all that confusing when you think about it. I mean, it was brought to my attention. I didn't realize this, Eric, but the United States of America, our abortion laws are on par with two other countries, North Korea and China. That's astonishing.
And this was brought up in the actual hearing. I think it was John Roberts who made that comparison, if I'm not mistaken. Another really encouraging sign that he's thinking along those lines.
Yes.
And not just thinking along those lines, but also wanting to make sure that his fellow justices are also hearing that information.
Yes. Well, Eric, what a great conversation this has been. Are you going to the March for Life?
Yes, I will be there for sure. In fact, I will be there distributing copies of our handbook. This is a wonderful tool you can find at prolifeaction.org. Sharing the pro-life message. This tiny little handbook, it fits right in your back pocket or in your purse and your book bag. It has all the answers to all of the questions. It's going to need a revision probably, we hope soon.
That's right.
The Supreme Court says in June. But every pro-lifer needs to be ready to defend the pro-life position, to share this pro-life message. This handbook not only gives you the information you need to do that, it also tells you how to do it. What's the right approach? What kind of words should you use? What kind of language should you use? What kind of posture should you have? And that's just $5 at prolifeaction.org. We'll be selling those at the March for Life. You can order one now and have it ready, or see us in the convention and pick up your copy.
Yes.
I can't wait to be back with my pro-life friends from all over the country at the March for Life in January.
It's just like that was like a little mini March for Life last week, and you're right. It's just so energizing, Eric. And it was like grad school for how to be a pro-life activist last week. Monica Miller is there, like, do you think Monica Miller knows how to talk to pro-aborts? I mean, it was just the spirit of joy and of understanding, because Eric, we both know that those people over there screaming for reproductive rights, I mean, these are people who are hurting. They have all this contrived anger, or maybe it's real anger, but they are misled, and they do need our prayers, and we know for a fact that prayer works.
It was noteworthy, I thought, that as the oral arguments began and the pro-life speakers, literally the amplifiers, began to broadcast the live audio from inside the building, the pro-lifers all quieted down and huddled close. People really wanted desperately to hear what the justices were asking and what the lawyers were saying. The pro-abortion side couldn't have cared less. They continued ranting and raving and screaming and swearing and all the vulgarity. And that I think that was really revealing, the fact that they really didn't care what the Supreme Court had to say about this. They were not curious about it. They just wanted to continue their rant. We've seen that again and again and again. There's a kind of an acting out that's going on
Yep.
here, and we have to understand that. We should really try to cultivate a spirit, and it's difficult, but we should try to cultivate a spirit of real compassion,
Yep.
because so many of them are hurting
Yep.
in so many different ways. And as we all are, none of us is unscathed by the rigors of this life in a fallen world and
Right.
in our fallen selves. And so to in a kind of non-judgmental way, to offer compassion to our enemies, to pray for our enemies, to love our enemies as Christ told us to do. It's challenging, but I think now more than ever, absolutely essential as we work toward really truly restoring the right to life to unborn children.
Eric, so well said, brother. It's been such, just a personal blessing to be able to talk to you, knowing your history and everything that you're doing. You've been in the trenches for so long. Thank you for all your work, Eric. Thank you for being with us today, and I look forward to seeing you at the March for Life.
Well, Jim, great to talk to you, and I'll see you out there in D.C. next month.
All right, God bless you, brother.
God bless you too.